Blackboard, you can check it out anytime. And the syllabus is kind of like a contract. It spells out the work that you're going to do and how that work is going to be evaluated. I personally would not add anything to the syllabus that's not in there. You might take some things out if they become too burdensome. But again, this is the checklist. You're probably used to seeing these kind of checklists by now, right? Where these are the skills that you're demonstrating in the speech. These are the points that it's worth. And then I try to give you some sort of feedback in that little box or column. So you're going to show your delivery skills. All those things that we worked on at the beginning of the semester, how you use your voice, your face, and your body in speaking. You might want to consider clothing. There's not a requirement for formal clothing here, but think about how you're communicating with your audience and how you're dressed. Having your head partially covered in our cultural context cuts you off from your audience. So I'd encourage everyone not to wear hats or hoods. For your closing interview, you will need to dress formally. The speech does not require that, but you should consider it. Okay, vocabulary. This is language and articulation. You're choosing word choices that are precise, vivid, and compelling and appropriate for this speech. So you'll be working on word choices for this speech. Complete sentences, as always. You guys have made a lot of progress with speaking in complete sentences without fillers. So keep using those skills in this final persuasive speech. It does need to be extemporaneous. You need to write a full sentence outline. I will insist on that, but you should not be reading from it during the speech. It needs to just flow naturally out of you. Using reasoning skills, use evidence to argue for a claim just like you did in the research presentation. If your research presentation was not sufficient, we would need to talk about that. You've got to either redo that or make it part of this speech. So whatever you came up with for your research presentation, you can certainly reuse here. You do not have to go off and do a bunch of other research, but you can reuse what you've got if you want to build this speech on your research topic. Use logic to argue for your claim. Structure at least part of the speech around a syllogism. And if you're not sure what that is, talk to me. Look at your notes. I tried to give you feedback on your notes from last class. If your syllogism, if you didn't have a syllogism in there, you needed to write one. If it was a little bit off, we need to go over it. Okay? Let's see. And then last but not least, appeals to emotion. That's what we're going to talk about today. How do you play with the emotions of your audience to get them on board and influence, move them to agree with you? If I can figure out how to set up a survey in Kahoot, we will give audience reaction on this. So at the end of your speech, we'll have a short little survey, and the audience, your listeners, will say, to what degree did you feel emotionally moved by that speech? To give a little bit of feedback there. Okay, any questions about these guidelines? Here's how I want to structure our time, God willing. Next week will be for practice. The following week you will actually give your speeches. We could maybe have 8 speeches one day, 7 speeches the next. And guys, we do not have time for makeups. So I will bring in a sign-up sheet and ask you to commit to a day. Please, please keep that commitment. Because if you miss it, there is no more time in the semester. The following week, hi Alexis. The following week, then we'll save that Monday for whatever debate or project you as a class end up choosing as a result of the persuasive speeches. So you see there's plugged in here extra points for having your project or topic chosen. So the class will decide which speech is the most compelling in terms of offering a topic that you want to debate or a project that you want to do, and we'll save Monday for that. The idea here is that engaging in a very formal but free conversation about that debate topic will also be a graded assignment. So as a class, perhaps you debate whether everyone should have a firearm or whether bowling should be an Olympic sport. And everyone would engage in that discussion in a particular way, so that's a graded assignment as well. Okay, Alexis is here. All right, so those are the guidelines for the persuasive speech. Think of it as sort of like a final exam where you're pulling everything together to today we'll talk about appealing to emotions. The goal will be, when I'm done talking at you, for you to craft, to create an appeal to emotion for your topic, whatever it is. And we'll go down all the claims that you came up with. And then speak that to me, one-on-one. We don't want to spoil your speech, right? By having your classmates hear what you're going to say. So I'll find an empty classroom and just see each of you for a few minutes to listen to whatever appeal to emotion you have come up with. So let's talk about these and be thinking as we go, what appeal to emotion might work for you. Review. So a persuasive speech is like a race. Knowing your audience is your starting point, and then pulling your audience along to agree with your claim is the goal of the speech. You want to influence them to accept your claim. So you do that by engaging their reason, particularly through a syllogism and through the use of evidence. You've got to do that in the speech. But then you also want to engage their emotions. So appeals to emotion is part of what you want to do, and this can be very powerful. So you're going to try to appeal to your audience's emotion in the speech. I'm going to share with you some strategies. The textbook has a lot more stuff, and I encourage you to look at it. Bless you. You might find something in the textbook that would work better for you than what I'm going to share. But I'm just going to share with you strategies that I'm aware of. Some of them I've used myself, but most of them I've just seen other people use effectively. First and most important is your delivery skills. It's how you speak, how you use your face, your voice, and your body that will enable you to connect with your audience. Does your facial expression appear open and welcoming and relaxed? Does your posture appear natural and relaxed and open? So going back to all these delivery skills we've been practicing, how you're dressed can make a difference in how you carry yourself. So do consider that. What image of yourself do you want to portray to your listeners? Okay. Make eye contact with everyone. When you give this speech, you're gonna be in the center of the space. Make each person feel as though they were the only person in the room. And you do that with eye contact. So really work on that in this persuasive speech. Use the space to move around the room, like Kyle with his bowling ball. You want to connect with every listener. As always, work on varying the pitch, the pacing, and the volume of your voice to create expressiveness. But don't be artificial. Don't overdo anything. Be natural. You guys were at speech day, right? Most of you? The student who won was a very artful speaker. But just between us, she came across as a little bit artificial. She was over-exaggerating, just a little bit, her posture and gestures and the pitch variation in her voice. Whatever you do, you'll connect with your audience better if it's you, it's who you are. If you are able, code switch. I heard a wonderful speech by a student in a speech contest I was helping to judge, who code switched into her grandmother's Greek accent. She was talking about the helpful bacteria in yogurt. So it was a very research-laden speech. She was given all these data, but then she'd code switch and become her grandmother, and it just woke up the speech like that. If you have the capacity to do it, use it. But again, only if it comes naturally, it isn't artificial. All right, narrative, telling stories. Our human brains are wired for storytelling. As you know, for most of human history, human speech was primarily, if not solely, oral. And people passed on the knowledge and the wisdom of their cultures by what? Storytelling. Stories naturally engage people. They grip people. So telling a story, even beginning with a story, might be a compelling way to introduce your speech if that fits with your topic. So Logan, for example, is going to argue that the Olympics cost too much. You could tell a compelling story and perhaps even use images of a family in poverty in Rio de Janeiro, or the horrible situation of street children living in sewers. And that's just going to grip people. It could be your own story. If this is something that affects or touches you personally, sharing your personal experience can give you credibility and really grab your listeners. Or you can ask your listeners to imagine something. So those of you who are talking about sports, let's see. Maybe it was Grace. Here, you want to talk about softball, right? So if you're describing your sport and just allowing your audience to feel what it's like to play that. Imagine the smell of the dust of the field, whatever, you know, so you're getting your listeners to place themselves inside an experience that can really, really grab their attention using concrete details. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you touch, what you taste, even if that's relevant. Keep it vivid, make it vivid, and keep it brief. You only have about 9 minutes for this speech, 10 at the outside. If your story goes on too long, you could also lose your listener's attention. They're going to be like, get to the point already. So, vivid and compelling but brief storytelling. Imagery and language can also be very powerful. This gets to the language and articulation part of the rubric. And there are various kinds of imagery you can use. A metaphor is a non-explicit comparison. So Martin Luther King Jr., for example, in that famous I Have a Dream speech, says something like, well, we'll listen to part of it, the sweltering summer of our discontent. He uses images, the summer heat, that's a concrete image that people can feel to describe something that's abstract. So using some compelling imagery in your speech. Let's see if I had any thoughts on this for you guys. Maybe, for example, well, I'll come back to that. I wrote down some ideas for you guys in my notes, but I can barely read my own notes about my glasses. Analogies are also a rational tool of reasoning. If you can compare your case to a case that your audience is likely to agree with, and I think I came up with an idea for this for phones. So Kara, you might argue that children shouldn't get phones until they're 12. If you want to stay with that topic, I think it's good. You could make an analogy between that and some other harmful habit that people have. Like, or some sort of addiction, something really just negative that people do, like smoking, or overeating, or drinking too much, or whatever. So if you make an analogy between phone use and something else, that can get across your argument. Eric, an idea you had for a claim was pit bulls are not vicious animals, or something like that.
Yeah.
You can make an analogy to some other form of prejudice that used to be common in our society that we've now let go of. If you think of it, so you're thinking of a case, it's a comparison, and we're going to listen to a speech a little bit later by a speaker who I think uses analogies well. You compare your case to something else you think your audience is likely to agree with. Analogies can work really well. What else did I think of? Bowling as a sport. If you can think of an analogy between bowling and something else that is considered a sport, that's one way to make that argument. Do you know what an allusion is from your literature classes?
No, it's when, isn't it when you're talking about something else that happened and kind of like comparing that, saying that and reminding them about that with the same story that you're saying?
Perfect. It's like a reminder of something else without telling your audience what it is. It often to a text, like a piece of literature. Words or stories or imagery from another source or text that your audience will recognize. Could be a Bible. The Bible, if you're talking to a Christian audience, for some audiences that works. Could be popular music or films. But you make a reference without saying what it is. And that can be very powerful if your audience recognizes it. It's going to pull them in and make them feel like they're in the know. A generation ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, if I said the phrase expecto patronum, everybody would know what that meant, right? And I got a smile out of you. So you say something that's recognizable, whether it's from popular culture or a sacred scripture or something else, maybe something that goes on here at Calumet College that everybody knows about as a student. An allusion is a reference to that. You don't tell your audience what it is, but they recognize it. And then you've got their attention. So think about allusions. I thought of, let me think of allusions for you guys. Josh, all citizens should own guns. You might use allusions to the founding documents of our country, if there are phrases from those documents that people might recognize. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like some of those words that Americans tend to kind of resonate with, or an allusion perhaps to the national anthem. So you kind of weave those words into your speech, and it'll grab people because they'll recognize them. Who else do you think might use an allusion? Come back to that. Okay, hyperbole means exaggeration. It can be especially effective coupled with humor. Let's see. See if I can think of an example. Hyperbole and exaggeration. So, for example, Christina, if you're thinking, I think you have a hidden humorous side. Yes, I do. And the very fact that you have the ethos, remember we talked about ethos of being kind of a quiet and reserved person? If you were to bust out in this class with humor, my God, you'd have us. You'd have us in the palm of your hand. But you want to talk about harmful habits of eating, right, or bad stuff. Exaggerate the disgustingness of the food we like to eat. Like, make us think about how one McDonald's burger has probably the meat from 100 different cows in it. You could even show us a video of how that meat is produced. Like, you could exaggerate or use hyperbole to really emphasize how disgusting junk food and fast food are, right? So exaggeration and hyperbole can really affect an audience if you kind of make things a bigger deal than maybe they really are. Rhetorical questions are another powerful potential. Here's another possibility for exaggeration I just thought of with sincere. You were thinking about recycling, right? You could exaggerate using hyperbole the laziness of students who won't walk another 20 steps to get to a fucking recycling bin. You know what I'm saying? So it's like just sort of exaggerating and overemphasizing things. Okay. Using swear words with restraint. So a rhetorical question is when you ask your audience a question that you kind of already know the answer to. I was thinking of Rebecca here. You could paint a picture if you want to do the sleep one. You're painting a picture of what sleep deprivation feels like, especially at this time in the semester. People can relate to that. And you could ask a rhetorical question like, do you really want to live like this? And your audience is going to be thinking, no, of course not. So rhetorical questions can be powerful ways to engage the audience in thinking about your topic. So if you use them well, if you put them in the right place in your speech. Naming your audience's experiences through vivid language can be an especially powerful way to appeal to emotion. You guys as students all know each other. You know what you guys are going through. If you can name the experience, you can get your listener to say, yeah, that's exactly how it is. That is how I feel. By retelling their stories or describing their experiences vividly. That can be a really powerful tool. I think Martin Luther King Jr. does that a little bit in his speech. He's describing naming people's experiences, and he gets those affirmative responses from that audience. Okay. Poetic devices are ways of using language that kind of verge into poetry. Anaphora is one of the devices suggested in the textbook. There are several that you could look at and use. This one can be effective. This is the repetition of a phrase at the beginning of 3 or 4 succeeding sentences. It does 2 things for you. It can build the intensity of your speech, but it can also give you time to think about what you're going to say next. It is a common technique of preachers. You start your sentence with this sort of formula, and it gives you time to think about, okay, what am I going to say here? You'll hear Dr. King use this in the I Have a Dream speech. He actually uses it multiple times throughout the whole speech. You've got to have a certain kind of personality to do this well. You've got to be the type of person who's energetic, like Daniela, you are very energetic. You could be moving around a room, connecting with your audience and using an anaphora to kind of ratchet up the intensity of their emotions. Let's see if I can think of. You were thinking about the pass-fail system. So an anaphora for that could be something like, students feel demoralized when blah, 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 and then you repeat that. Students feel demoralized when this and this and this happens, or something. So you're using that same phrase over and over again to kind of ratchet up the emotion of your audience. We'll listen to Dr. King do that, and you can see kind of how it works. Any sort of rhythmic speech, speech that has a rhythm, sentences that are brief and powerful, that kind of flow, where you'll have two sentences maybe that have the same sort of sound or the same sort of rhythm that can give the sort of poetic flow to your speech. Photos or videos. Photos can be incredibly compelling. This photo captured the attention of the world in 2015. Have you seen it?
No.
It's the body of a refugee or migrant child from Syria that washed up on a beach in Turkey. His family was fleeing the Syrian civil war, tried to cross the Mediterranean Sea, and their boat capsized, probably along with a bunch of other refugees. And this little boy's body just washes up on this beach. Powerful photo. The picture's worth 1,000 words. Here's an example. The use of images and videos depends on how you embed those in your speech and how you time them. You can't just pull up a compelling picture at the beginning of your speech and then talk about it. You've got to frame it. You introduce it with something. Pull it up, and PowerPoint has great tools for allowing you to do this. I can help you. Pull it up at just the right moment and tell your audience what it is. So you've got to embed that photo or that video within the speech in a way that adds to the speech compellingly, and timing is everything. It's particularly true with videos. So if you want to use photos and videos, and I would encourage it, you've got to practice. There can't be any lag time while you're fussing around with the electronics. You will lose your audience. They will be on their phones. So timing is everything. Videos and images are great, but they've got to be embedded in the speech. You've got to explain what they are in some way so people understand them. Introduce it and then follow it up with some sort of explanation. Keep videos brief. 30 seconds is probably the optimal time, but even shorter clips that just illustrate a point you're trying to make. And again, no lag time between your speech and the video. Question?
Do you think it's a good or a bad idea to start with the video?
If you introduce it briefly, so that it's embedded into your speech. The clip I show you from John Oliver starts with a video, but he gives it this really brief introduction. Yeah. So you try it and we'll see how it works when you practice. Okay. Humor if you dare. Some people have naturally funny personalities. I do not. When I try to tell jokes, they normally fall flat on their face, so I do not typically try. But many of you, Alexis, I think you're naturally funny. You, in fact, the drawing you did in your notes on Monday, you have a naturally funny personality. You should try this, right? You gotta know your audience well, because what is funny to one person might be offensive to the next person. So the danger with humor is that you could offend someone. Like if you're making fun of a political figure, I was making fun of the 3rd District Hammond City Councilman in my class yesterday, but somebody likes that political figure, you've lost the approval of an audience member. So it's just, consider the potential for offense when weighing whether to use humor. You might even want to take the temperature of your audience as you're speaking, and this is the beauty of extemporaneous speech. You can choose whether or not to throw in a joke at a moment when everybody just seems to be kind of lost or bored. Again, it's all timing and pacing. Where you put that joke in, how you pace the joke itself, whether your audience is with you and how well engaged they are. Choose and adjust any appeal to emotion strategy to your personality and to the audience. And the time frame, you'll have plan your speech to be maybe 8 to 9 minutes long. For some reason, when you actually give a speech, it tends to go beyond the time that you predicted. So maybe practice it to be, you say even 8 minutes if possible, 8 and a half, because it'll probably spill over to 9 or 9 and a half. Great. Let me show you a couple of examples. So this is just, I'm going to pick 2 clips from the well-known I Have a Dream speech by Dr. King, and both of these he's reading. But this is a good example of Athos, his audience who knows who he is. He does not have to use a lot of dramatic delivery techniques to have their attention. He has their attention. They will hang on his every word no matter what he says. So he is just reading. He's not even always making eye contact. Toward the end of the speech, he leaves the script behind. And something happens that Christians would call divine inspiration. Christians believe the Holy Spirit can kind of seize people and start speaking through them. And then he starts to speak extemporaneously. He's making it up as he goes along, right? He's using that I have a dream anaphora phrase. This isn't that part of the speech. It's before that. So he is reading it. It's very literary. See if you can spot these. Take some notes and we'll talk about it afterwards. Where is the allusion to the Gettysburg Address? Where is the allusion to the Declaration of Independence? I'll try to make sure we see that part. What metaphors does he use? He uses incredibly vivid imagery. What anaphora, what phrase does he use as an anaphora? A repeated first part of a sentence. Can you spot an allusion to the Bible? Well, he's quoting from the Bible, but he doesn't say that's what he's doing. Yet his listeners who are Christians are probably going to recognize it, and it's very powerful. So let's just look at a couple of these clips. Go right to our start. I think the volume is all the way up. I want to blast those. Don't do this in your persuasive speech. Have that video ready to go.
In whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Picking up on some of these techniques. What was the anaphora phrase? Yes. And you heard how, as he sort of ratcheted up the intensity of that part of the speech, he was naming his audience's experiences. He got a reaction out of that. Good, very good. Okay, 944. There's a biblical allusion in here somewhere. See if you can pick up on it. If you were raised Christian or you're familiar with the Bible.
We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Okay. Tell me what you picked up on. Let me go back to the slide. We got one of the anaphoras. What was the second one? Anybody? Alexis?
We can't be satisfied.
Good. Kept repeating that phrase. How about some of the imagery, particularly metaphors? He's using concrete images. Rebecca?
The metaphor of the like the check.
Yeah. So it's a concrete image for something abstract. A check is a piece of paper that tells you somebody's promising to give you money, and you go to the bank to cash it, you should get money. So he was basically saying the founding documents of this country were like a check that hasn't really delivered that promise yet. What else? This was just, especially the first clip I showed you, was laden with imagery. Tatiana.
I don't know if it's right, but it said that they were lonely as
Perfect. Yes. We're on this lonely island of poverty in a sea of prosperity. Absolutely. That's a metaphor. The island is a metaphor for the situation of an underprivileged group of people living in poverty inside of a society that's very wealthy. Did anyone else pick up on any other metaphors? These are powerful. You can put these kinds of things in your speech. Alexis?
In the second clip, you said, I forgot what it was, but rolls down like water and something more stream.
Good. That was an allusion. Did anyone recognize that? This is where, when you want to use allusions, you have to make sure you're knowing your audience. It's to the Bible. That is a quote from the book of the prophet Isaiah. In his speaking, he was a Christian minister. He probably had much of the Bible memorized. It would just flow out of him. He wouldn't even have to think. But in that biblical book, the prophet Isaiah is speaking to the Israelite people who are being oppressed by the Babylonians and holding out this vision of the future where God's justice will transform society. That is the Christian vision of the reign of God. And for a person who is familiar with the Bible and who is a person of Christian faith, it is very, very powerful to hear scriptures like that quoted. So we've got most of this. Did anyone pick up on the allusion to the Gettysburg Address? It was right at the beginning.
500 years ago.
You got it. I think he said something like 5 score years ago,
Yeah.
which is 100 years. So he was referring to 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation, right? When Lincoln opened his Gettysburg Address with 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in hope, I think, something like that. So he was alluding to the Gettysburg Address, expecting his listeners would recognize that. Okay, let's take a look at something a little more lighthearted. Has anybody here watched John Oliver videos? good, so this won't be boring, I hope. He blends appeals to emotion and appeals to reason throughout his speeches. He has a show on Comedy Central, but you can find most of them on YouTube. He's often addressing social issues. He artfully weaves video clips into his speech, so notice that. Notice how he embeds the opening video montage into his speech, introducing it, like Sincere said, very briefly, but then following it up immediately with a humorous reaction which gets a laugh out of his audience. If you're going to use a video, you need to use it this way. Now, he has a tech team that's doing this for him, but if you practice, and there are ways to use PowerPoint where you can embed video clips into a PowerPoint slide, you can do something like this for yourself. Notice the smoothness of transitions, speech, video, speech. He's probably making gestures there's a video about ladders. He's probably making some gesture and facial expression that the audience can see that gets a laugh out of them. You'll hear the laughter towards the end of the clip and you're like, what's going on? He uses hyperbole, exaggeration. He exaggerates sponsorships. And again, he exaggerates with the ladders. So pay attention to how he uses exaggeration. He uses a lot of humor. But then he shifts gears very suddenly to being serious. So he'll play around with the audience's emotions going from humor to seriousness until he's really got you engaged. And then at the end of the clip, see if you can spot the analogy. He's comparing the situation of, it's really how college athletes are treated. He's comparing that situation to a different kind of situation that he expects his audience will agree with. So let's just take a listen and see what you think. Volume might be a little too high here.
Our main story tonight concerns the fact that one of America's most sacred annual traditions is upon us.
Everything comes down to this.